Australia's political landscape experienced a dramatic shift this week as leaders signalled a new direction in foreign policy, drawing global attention and intense debate. The unexpected move to distance itself from long-standing US alignment sparked conversations not only within government circles but also among everyday citizens who watched closely, wondering how this decision might reshape the nation's future. Analysts quickly labelled it one of the most surprising diplomatic turns in recent memory, and news channels across the world began running continuous coverage, inviting experts, former diplomats, and economists to share their perspectives. In the early hours after the announcement, social media platforms were flooded with reactions. Some users celebrated what they called a new era of independence, while others questioned whether such a bold step had been carefully calculated or driven by political pressure behind closed doors. Hashtags related to Australia's foreign policy began trending globally, showing just how deeply the decision resonated beyond national borders. Within Australia itself, university campuses and public forums became hotspots for discussion. Students of political science organised debates, professors published opinion pieces overnight, and radio talk shows received record numbers of callers expressing curiosity, pride, or concern. The atmosphere felt charged with a mix of excitement and uncertainty, as if the country had stepped onto a path whose destination was still hidden in fog. Government officials maintained a composed tone, emphasising that the decision was not about hostility but about redefining priorities in a changing world. Press conferences were carefully worded, with spokespersons highlighting economic resilience, regional partnerships, and the importance of maintaining balanced diplomacy. Yet every statement seemed to raise as many questions as it answered, leaving journalists searching for deeper meaning between the lines. International observers began analysing trade routes, defence agreements, and historical alliances, comparing past diplomatic shifts to the present moment. Newspapers in Europe and Asia ran editorials exploring whether this move signalled a broader transformation in global politics, or simply a strategic adjustment unique to Australia's current leadership. Financial analysts monitored currency fluctuations and stock market responses, noting subtle ripples that hinted at investor caution. Meanwhile, inside Parliament, closed-door meetings stretched late into the night. Lawmakers from different parties exchanged viewpoints, some urging patience and calculated planning while others advocated swift action to capitalise on new opportunities. Leaked rumours about policy drafts and potential agreements only fueled public curiosity, turning political speculation into a daily national conversation. Community leaders and business owners also joined the dialogue, recognising that foreign policy decisions often trickle down to everyday economic realities. Exporters wondered how trade relations might evolve, while technology firms speculated about new partnerships that could open doors to innovation and growth. The sense that something significant was unfolding created both hope and nervous anticipation across multiple industries. Television panels continued to dissect every development, replaying speeches, analysing body language, and inviting retired ambassadors to interpret subtle diplomatic signals. The narrative slowly expanded beyond politics into culture, identity, and national confidence, suggesting that this shift was not merely administrative but symbolic of a broader transformation in how Australia viewed its place in the world. As days passed, new details began to emerge about potential collaborations with regional neighbours, hinting that the government strategy might involve strengthening ties closer to home rather than relying heavily on distant alliances. These hints added another layer of intrigue, encouraging commentators to explore scenarios that ranged from economic booms to strategic realignments in defence cooperation. Public rallies and peaceful demonstrations appeared in major cities, reflecting both support and scepticism. Citizens carried banners, gave interviews, and shared personal opinions that revealed a deeply engaged population. The streets themselves became spaces of dialogue, where strangers exchanged thoughts about diplomacy as naturally as they would discuss sports or entertainment. Behind the scenes, think tanks and policy institutes worked tirelessly, releasing research papers filled with projections, risk assessments, and long-term forecasts. Their findings circulated rapidly online, influencing discussions and shaping narratives. Some reports painted optimistic pictures of diversified trade and innovation, while others warned of transitional challenges that could test economic stability. Foreign diplomats stationed in Canberra observed the developments carefully, attending official receptions and informal gatherings where conversations often drifted towards speculation about future agreements. Every handshake and photograph taken at these events was scrutinised by the media, turning ordinary diplomatic etiquette into headline-worthy material. In households across the country, families discussed the issue over dinner tables, blending personal concerns with national pride. For many, the topic represented more than politics. It symbolized identity, independence, and the courage to redefine long-standing relationships. The emotional tone varied from excitement to apprehension, but indifference was rare. Educational institutions incorporated the unfolding events into their curricula almost instantly. Teachers encouraged students to analyze speeches, compare international reactions, and understand the historical context behind such decisions. Classrooms transformed into miniature forums of global awareness, nurturing a generation increasingly conscious of geopolitical dynamics. As speculation continued to build, whispers of upcoming announcements and potential high-profile visits added suspense to the atmosphere. News anchors teased major updates expected soon, keeping viewers hooked and refreshing their feeds for the slightest confirmation. The narrative kept expanding, layer upon layer, like a story still writing itself in real time. And just as the nation seemed to grasp one piece of the puzzle, another rumor or development would surface, shifting attention once again and leaving everyone watching closely, aware that the next chapter of this unfolding political transformation was still just beyond the horizon. The spotlight intensified when Carney was formally invited to address the Australian Parliament, an invitation that immediately raised questions about the deeper message behind such a gesture. Political commentators noted that invitations of this level are rarely routine, often carrying symbolic weight that signals shifting priorities or the beginning of new diplomatic chapters. Newsrooms across the globe began dissecting every detail, from the timing of the announcement to the wording of official statements, searching for clues about what this moment truly represented. Within hours, international media outlets placed the story at the top of their bulletins, framing it as a potential turning point in regional politics. Headlines varied in tone. Some described it as a bold strategic move, while others called it a calculated diplomatic experiment. The sheer speed at which the news spread demonstrated how interconnected global politics had become, where a single invitation could echo across continents within minutes. Inside Australia, government corridors buzzed with quiet conversations and strategic planning. Advisors prepared briefing notes, analysts compiled background reports, and communication teams rehearsed responses to anticipated questions. Every step suggested that the event was not merely ceremonial but part of a carefully orchestrated sequence intended to send a clear yet nuanced signal to both allies and competitors. Public curiosity grew stronger as speculation filled television debates and online forums. Citizens wondered what topics Carney might address: trade agreements, climate initiatives, technological cooperation, or regional security. The uncertainty itself fueled engagement, turning ordinary news updates into widely discussed national conversations that crossed generational and professional boundaries. Economists began weighing the potential financial implications, pointing out that high-profile parliamentary addresses often precede trade negotiations or investment dialogues. Business communities watched attentively, hoping the speech might open doors to new markets or collaborative ventures. Even small fluctuations in financial indicators were interpreted as early reactions to the growing diplomatic momentum. Opposition voices, however, urged caution, emphasizing that symbolism should not overshadow practical consequences. They argued that while diversification of alliances could offer benefits, it also required delicate balancing to avoid misunderstandings or unintended tensions. Their statements added another layer of complexity, ensuring that the invitation remained a subject of both optimism and scrutiny. Meanwhile, foreign embassies in Canberra followed the developments closely, sending updates to their respective capitals. Diplomats attended preparatory events and informal gatherings where conversations often revolved around interpreting the broader implications of the invitation. Every handshake, meeting, and photograph seemed to carry amplified significance under the watchful eye of the press. As the scheduled date of the address approached, anticipation continued to build, transforming what began as a formal announcement into a narrative filled with expectation and unanswered questions. The invitation had already achieved one undeniable outcome. It had placed Australia at the centre of international attention, setting the stage for moments that many believed would influence diplomatic discussions for months to come. With the true impact still unfolding, inside Parliament, reactions were sharply divided, creating an atmosphere that felt tense yet historic at the same time. Some lawmakers rose in support of the invitation, applauding the idea that engaging with influential global figures could open doors to innovation, economic expansion, and fresh diplomatic energy. They argued that in a rapidly evolving world, nations must remain flexible and willing to explore conversations beyond their traditional circles if they wish to stay competitive and relevant. On the other side of the chamber, several representatives voiced serious concerns, warning that even symbolic gestures can carry heavy consequences. They emphasized that long-standing alliances were built over decades of cooperation and shared interests, and any perceived distancing might introduce uncertainty in defense coordination, intelligence sharing, and trade stability. Their speeches were filled with cautionary tones, reminding colleagues that diplomacy often operates on perception as much as on policy. The parliamentary halls echoed with passionate arguments, as both sides attempted to frame the narrative in their favor. Supporters highlighted opportunities for diversified partnerships and reduced dependency, while critics pointed to the risks of misinterpretation by global allies. The debate extended beyond simple approval or rejection, evolving into a broader philosophical discussion about sovereignty, loyalty, and strategic independence. Media galleries overlooking the chamber captured every exchange, broadcasting clips that quickly circulated online. Viewers witnessed moments of applause followed by stretches of silence, reflecting the emotional weight carried by each statement. Political analysts later described the session as one of the most engaging parliamentary discussions in recent years, not because of confrontation, but because of the depth of perspectives presented. Behind the scenes, party strategists calculated how public opinion might shift depending on the outcomes of these debates. Internal meetings continued late into the evening, with advisors examining polling data and drafting talking points designed to resonate with both cautious voters and those eager for change. The invitation had effectively become more than a diplomatic issue. It was now influencing domestic political strategies as well. Veteran politicians drew on historical precedents, recalling earlier moments when Australia faced crossroads in its foreign relations. These reflections added context and gravity to the conversation, reminding newer members that today's decisions might shape the nation's direction for decades. The chamber transformed into a place where history and future possibilities seemed to meet in real time. As discussions stretched across multiple sessions, the divisions remained visible yet constructive. Rather than dissolving into hostility, the disagreements often revealed a shared desire for national strength, even if the methods differed. Observers noted that this diversity of opinion was itself a sign of a healthy democratic process, demonstrating that the country was actively evaluating its global identity instead of passively accepting inherited positions. With each passing day, the parliamentary discourse continued to evolve, drawing in new voices and fresh perspectives. The invitation served as a catalyst, pushing lawmakers to re-examine policies, alliances, and long-term visions. And while no final consensus had yet emerged, it was clear that the conversation inside those walls was far from over, with further debates expected to reshape the tone and direction of Australia's diplomatic journey. Public opinion across the country soon mirrored the divisions seen inside Parliament, turning the diplomatic development into a nationwide conversation rather than a purely political event. Supporters of the move openly praised the government for what they described as a bold display of independence and courage. To them, the decision symbolized a maturing national identity, one that was confident enough to make choices based on its own priorities rather than relying heavily on historical alignments. They believed that stronger autonomy could unlock new economic partnerships, attract diversified investments, and encourage innovation across industries. Social media platforms became vibrant arenas of discussion, with hashtags, opinion threads, and live discussions gaining momentum each hour. Influencers, journalists, and everyday citizens shared their viewpoints, often blending patriotism with practical arguments about trade growth and international cooperation. For many young Australians in particular, the shift felt like an opportunity to redefine how their country was perceived on the global stage, giving rise to a sense of excitement about future possibilities. At the same time, critics voiced equally strong concerns, warning that bold moves in diplomacy can carry hidden risks. They feared that distancing from traditional allies, even symbolically, might strain long-standing relationships that had provided economic stability and defense assurance for decades. Some pointed out that global politics often reacts unpredictably, and what appears to be a confident step today could trigger unintended consequences tomorrow. Public forums, radio call-in shows, and community gatherings reflected this cautious sentiment. Business owners questioned how the decision might affect export agreements, while retired military officials discussed the importance of reliable alliances during regional tensions or humanitarian crises. These conversations revealed that skepticism was not rooted in opposition alone but also in practical fears about security and economic continuity. Families and friend circles found themselves debating the issue over dinners and weekend meetups, turning foreign policy into a surprisingly personal topic. For some, it became a matter of national pride and self-determination. For others, it was about safeguarding long-standing friendships between nations. The emotional tone varied widely. Hope, anxiety, excitement, and doubt all coexisted in the public sphere. Opinion polls released during this period showed fluctuating numbers, suggesting that many citizens were still forming their views as new information emerged. Analysts noted that public perception seemed to shift with each official statement or international reaction, indicating how sensitive and dynamic the situation had become. No single narrative dominated for long, as fresh developments continuously reshaped perspectives. Cultural figures and academics also entered the dialogue, publishing essays and participating in televised discussions that explored the broader meaning of independence in a modern, interconnected world. Their contributions added intellectual depth to what might otherwise have been a purely emotional debate, encouraging citizens to consider both short-term impacts and long-term visions. As days went by, it became clear that public opinion was not settling into a fixed stance but evolving alongside the unfolding events. The nation found itself engaged in an ongoing internal dialogue, one that extended beyond politics into questions of identity, security, and opportunity. While the final direction of collective sentiment still remained open and continuously taking shape, Carney's anticipated speech soon transformed into the focal point of national and international attention, with media outlets counting down the days and hours as if preparing for a major historic broadcast. Expectations grew that he would touch on economic cooperation, climate strategy, digital innovation, and long-term technological partnerships that could redefine regional collaboration. The build-up itself created a wave of suspense, as citizens, investors, and diplomats all waited to see whether his words would merely reassure audiences or introduce bold new proposals. Television networks began airing special segments analyzing possible themes of the address, inviting economists, environmental experts, and former ambassadors to share predictions. Each expert offered a slightly different interpretation, which only deepened public curiosity rather than settling it. The constant stream of analysis turned the upcoming speech into more than a political event. It became a cultural moment that people discussed in offices, universities, and even casual social gatherings. Financial markets reacted subtly to the growing anticipation. Small fluctuations in currency values and stock indices were interpreted by analysts as signs of cautious optimism mixed with uncertainty. Business leaders watched closely, aware that a single statement about trade incentives or technological collaboration could shift investor sentiment almost instantly. In boardrooms across major cities, contingency plans and opportunity strategies were quietly drafted. Environmental groups also paid close attention, hoping the speech would highlight sustainable development and climate cooperation. Activists organized online campaigns encouraging ambitious commitments, while industry representatives prepared counterarguments centered on economic balance and industrial growth. This parallel preparation revealed how one speech had the power to influence multiple sectors simultaneously, from energy to manufacturing to innovation. Inside diplomatic circles, embassies exchanged briefings and speculative memos, attempting to forecast the tone and direction of the address. Invitations to viewing events and official receptions were sent out, signaling that the speech was expected to carry symbolic as well as practical significance. Every preparatory gesture suggested that the occasion was being treated as a milestone rather than a routine parliamentary appearance. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens followed updates through mobile notifications and news apps, often refreshing their screens for the latest hints or leaked excerpts. Conversations ranged from hopeful predictions of economic growth to cautious reminders that speeches sometimes inspire more headlines than actual change. This mix of optimism and realism created a layered public mood, excited yet watchful. Educational institutions and policy think tanks organized live watch sessions and panel discussions scheduled immediately after the address. Students prepared questions, researchers compiled background notes, and moderators drafted discussion frameworks in advance. The anticipation itself became an educational exercise in understanding diplomacy, economics, and global communication. As the day of the speech drew nearer, the sense of curiosity only intensified, filling the political atmosphere with speculation and quiet tension. Every new rumour or unofficial comment seemed to add another layer of intrigue, leaving the public and international observers alike poised in expectation, aware that the forthcoming words might set conversations and consequences into motion that were only just beginning to form. International responses soon began pouring in from every corner of the world, turning Australia's decision into a truly global talking point rather than a regional headline. Governments released carefully worded statements that balanced diplomacy with subtle interpretation, ensuring their reactions neither overcommitted nor appeared indifferent. Some nations viewed Australia's actions as evidence of shifting global power dynamics, suggesting that middle power countries were increasingly seeking flexible alliances instead of fixed blocs. In parts of Europe and Asia, political analysts described the move as a reflection of a broader international trend, where countries reassess their foreign policies to match economic realities and technological change. Editorial columns debated whether this was the beginning of a new diplomatic era or simply a strategic adjustment influenced by short-term priorities. The diversity of opinions highlighted how differently each region interpreted the same development through its own geopolitical lens. Meanwhile, a number of governments treated the situation with cautious neutrality, interpreting it as a temporary maneuver rather than a permanent shift. Their representatives emphasized continuity and cooperation, signaling that established partnerships would likely remain intact despite evolving strategies. This balanced tone aimed to prevent unnecessary tension while keeping diplomatic doors open for future dialogue. Financial markets responded with noticeable but measured caution. Currency traders monitored fluctuations closely, and stock exchanges recorded minor swings that reflected both uncertainty and anticipation. Investors seemed aware that diplomatic developments often influence long-term economic confidence, yet they also recognized the potential for new agreements that could stimulate trade and innovation. International business communities followed the situation with equal interest, viewing it as a possible gateway to emerging collaborations. Multinational corporations began assessing how policy changes might open alternative supply chains, technology partnerships, or investment opportunities. In this sense, uncertainty did not only bring concern, it also carried the promise of untapped possibilities for those prepared to adapt quickly. Global news organizations continued round-the-clock coverage, comparing expert opinions from different countries and highlighting contrasting narratives. Some broadcasts framed the development as bold and transformative, while others portrayed it as a calculated diplomatic balancing act designed to strengthen negotiation power rather than disrupt alliances. The constant media spotlight amplified every official comment and market reaction. Diplomatic missions across capitals held internal briefings and informal consultations, exchanging insights about how the shift might influence regional cooperation. Ambassadors attended policy forums and economic summits with renewed attentiveness, aware that even subtle changes in tone or language could shape interpretations. The atmosphere within diplomatic circles was observant rather than alarmed, marked by watchful patience. As days progressed, the mixture of caution and curiosity continued to define international reactions. No single viewpoint dominated, and the unfolding narrative remained open-ended, with governments, investors, and analysts all recognizing that the full implications were still developing and that each new statement or agreement could gradually redefine the direction of global perception. Experts quickly weighed in, emphasizing that diplomatic relationships are rarely fixed or absolute, and that countries often recalibrate alliances to reflect evolving economic, technological, and security priorities. They noted that international relations function more like a dynamic network than a static set of rules, where flexibility and adaptation can be as important as loyalty or tradition. Analysts pointed out that shifts in alignment are not inherently confrontational but often reflect calculated strategies designed to safeguard long-term national interests. In Australia's case, specialists highlighted that the recent decision should not be interpreted as hostility toward the United States. Instead, it appeared to be a measured effort to broaden strategic options, diversify partnerships, and engage with emerging markets and regional neighbours. By creating multiple channels for collaboration, Australia could maintain influence on key global issues without relying exclusively on a single ally. Political scientists and foreign policy scholars underscored that such moves are common among middle power nations, which must balance the demands of global diplomacy with domestic priorities. They argued that flexibility allows a country to navigate uncertainty, respond to crises, and seize opportunities as they arise, rather than being constrained by historical allegiances. Economic experts echoed this sentiment, suggesting that diversification of alliances could stimulate trade and innovation. By exploring partnerships beyond traditional frameworks, Australia might attract investment in technology, renewable energy, and infrastructure, thereby strengthening both its economy and international standing. These potential gains were often highlighted as a strategic motivation behind the decision. Regional analysts also noted that Australia's recalibration could serve as a subtle message to neighbouring countries, signalling willingness to engage collaboratively while maintaining sovereign decision-making. This could help reinforce Australia's leadership role in regional initiatives related to climate change, security, and economic development. Former diplomats weighed in with historical comparisons, recalling times when countries adjusted foreign policy priorities to better navigate changing global power dynamics. They emphasized that adaptability is often a hallmark of effective statesmanship, particularly in periods of rapid geopolitical transformation. Media outlets amplified these expert perspectives, publishing detailed analyses that framed the decision as strategic rather than confrontational. Editorials highlighted that public perception often lags behind the calculated reasoning behind diplomatic maneuvers, stressing the importance of understanding nuance in international relations. As discussions continued, the overarching consensus among experts was that Australia's move represented a pragmatic recalibration rather than a radical break. It reflected an awareness of a complex, multipolar world where nations must continuously evaluate their alliances, ensuring they remain flexible, resilient, and capable of advancing both national and regional interests in a rapidly changing environment. As the world turned its eyes toward Canberra and Parliament prepared for Carney's highly anticipated address, one fact stood out unmistakably: Australia had succeeded in placing itself at the centre of global attention. Media outlets from New York to Tokyo covered every detail, from the schedule of the address to speculation about its key themes, reflecting the high stakes and widespread curiosity surrounding the event. International leaders, investors, and policy analysts monitored developments closely, aware that the outcomes could influence regional and even global strategies. The nation itself seemed caught between anticipation and reflection. Citizens followed news updates with a mixture of pride, curiosity, and caution, discussing the implications for Australia's economy, security, and standing on the world stage. The symbolic weight of the invitation, combined with the careful build-up around the speech, reinforced the perception that this was more than routine diplomacy. It was a deliberate statement about Australia's evolving identity and ambitions. Political commentators suggested that the significance of Carney's address would extend far beyond the speech itself. It could serve as a catalyst for new trade agreements, technological partnerships, and climate initiatives, while also shaping public understanding of the country's foreign policy direction. Analysts emphasized that the real impact would depend on the concrete policies and collaborations that followed, rather than the ceremony alone. Diplomats and foreign observers acknowledged the strategic nuance in Australia's approach. While the move was widely seen as a step toward diversification and flexibility, it was also carefully measured to avoid alienating long-standing partners. The balance between signaling independence and maintaining alliances highlighted the sophistication of contemporary diplomatic practice. For businesses and investors, the address represented both opportunity and uncertainty. Markets reacted subtly to each hint or commentary leading up to the speech, reflecting the delicate interplay between political developments and economic confidence. International corporations monitored policy hints closely, weighing potential impacts on trade, investment, and regional operations. Academics and think tanks used the event as a teaching moment, analyzing it as a case study in modern diplomacy, alliance management, and strategic communication. Discussions ranged from the symbolism of parliamentary invitations to the practical realities of international negotiation, offering nuanced insights into how nations project influence in a multipolar world. Despite the intense scrutiny, much remained unknown. Questions lingered about how Australia's broader strategy would unfold, how allies would respond in practice, and whether this moment would mark a turning point or remain largely symbolic. Every stakeholder, from citizens to foreign governments, recognized that the story was still in motion, with real consequences yet to emerge. Ultimately, one message was unmistakable: Australia's recent diplomatic manoeuvres had captured global attention and signalled a willingness to redefine its role on the world stage. Whether this moment would lead to a lasting transformation or simply stand as a historic symbol depended on the policies, partnerships, and actions that followed. But the nation had clearly opened a new chapter in its diplomatic narrative, one watched closely by the entire international community.